So, hi everyone. Glad to have you here on the channel. Joining us today is Paul A. Goble, an expert in Eurasian politics and post-Soviet affairs. With years of experience as an analyst and advisor, he specializes in ethnic conflict and Russia's role in the region. His work has been widely recognized in the field of international relations. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure for us as well. My first question is going to be short and straight to the point. It is, can the West afford to let Ukraine lose this war?
The West would be making a very, very serious mistake if it does not do everything in its power to make sure that Ukraine wins the war, not just not losing it, but win it. It is terribly important that the Russian Federation and Mr. Putin be shown that aggression, armed aggression of the kind that Putin has launched against a sovereign state is something the international system will not tolerate. Moreover, it's terribly important for Russia itself and for the peoples who live within the borders of the Russian Federation that Russia be defeated. Again, it's not enough that Ukraine doesn't lose. It's terribly important that Russia does lose. And that's important for the West because unless and until that happens, Russia will continue to have the same dynamic of aggression abroad and repression at home that we've seen the last 20 years under Vladimir Putin. It's not a question of personalities. It's a question of an imperial state that has outlived its time and that must be destroyed in order that we have a more peaceful world. If something tragic should happen, and if Ukraine should lose, and Russia fails to lose, then the tragedy for the peoples living under Moscow's control and the tragedy for the peoples of the rest of the world will be unimaginably horrific. And so it's my view that while there are some in the West who think very short term about not adequately supporting Ukraine, there is a growing consensus in America and in Europe that Russia must not be allowed to avoid losing this war and that Ukraine must win it.
And you have the feeling that it's growing?
I really believe that despite all the noise in Western countries, that the consensus in government is that precisely as I have suggested. Many people, of course, are afraid that if Russia were in a position where it was losing, the Kremlin would choose to use nuclear weapons. I would remind everyone that in 1991, when many people thought the Soviet Union would never fall apart, it couldn't fall apart. It was a nuclear power. It would use nuclear weapons. Cooler heads prevailed. There were people in Moscow who were prepared to launch a nuclear war because Russia was losing, but most people recognize that that would be an act of suicide. And it's my view, too, that while Mr. Putin may just be insane enough to think about using nuclear weapons, there are a large number of other people who are not prepared to see that kind of conflict happen. So it's my belief that Russia is running out of personnel, it's running out of weapons. The West is doing more for Ukraine, and I hope will continue to do more. And so we will see Russia lose this war, and that we will see Ukraine win it. And I do believe that despite all the fears about Russia as a big country and it has nuclear weapons, those are the driving feelings right now in Western capitals. I think that the reaction of the Western community to people like Viktor Orban of Hungary is so strong that it's pretty clear that if in February 2022 many people couldn't imagine that the war would be going on for 2.5 years. Now, the very same people can't imagine that it will end with anything, but at least a Ukrainian victory in whole or in part, and a Russian defeat.
I very hope you are right, and I really hope that it's going to happen soon.
Well, I think that the people often say of Russia that it's a place where nothing changes for 1,000 years until everything changes in 1 week.
Yeah.
And my own sense is that we don't know when this is going to, when it will happen, but that the conditions for a Russian defeat are already emerging. Look at it, just consider one thing. The entire world has been watching as Vladimir Putin has been paying more and more rubles to get Russian men to sign up for fighting in Ukraine. A year and a half ago, no Russian was being offered more than 100,000 rubles. Now, in some places, in Moscow, for example, it's up to 2 million rubles.
Yeah.
That is an indication of just how few people really want to go and how much the Russian government has to do to try to field an army. This isn't an example of Putin's strength. It's an example of Putin's weakness. That if Russia were united behind Putin, if you had a Russian army that was effective, you wouldn't be paying 2 million rubles for each person who signs up. We've just had this another example. This week, Putin went up to the north and started the largest naval maneuver in Russian history since 1991. Well, except consider what happened. That maneuver was mostly on the internal waterways of the Russian Federation, Lake Ladoga and the areas, the rivers and canals leading into it. If this was truly a blue water Navy ocean exercise, and the Kremlin named it Ocean 2024 to try to get people to look away from that, you wouldn't be behaving that way. You'd have ships in the Atlantic and the Pacific, but the Russian Navy is no longer in a position to do that. The Black Sea Fleet is gone, thanks to the Ukrainian actions. The icebreaker program that the West has talked so much about is now falling further and further behind schedule. We're not talking about it. We're not talking about an emerging superpower. We're talking about a dying superpower. That doesn't mean it doesn't have real strengths, but it does mean that the situation is such that I believe there will come a moment, and I, like you, hopes that it will come soon. I hoped it would come sooner than right now, that the moment will come when there will be people in Moscow who will decide to save themselves and to save something of Russia. They need to get out of Ukraine, and they need to change the policies that Mr. Putin has been promoting. And I think that we should not discount that possibility. And it would be one thing that flows from that is that the West needs to make far clearer than it has up to now that those Russians who are prepared to take action like that will find the West a reliable and supportive partner. That you will not be sanctioned if you turn away from the policies that Putin has pushed. You will be welcomed back into the international order. That needs to be made clear. We need to make it as attractive an option as possible by saying those things. I believe that if we were doing that right now, we would hasten the day when these things would happen in Moscow.
You mean like cheer them up to do so?
You simply have to. One of the things is we have adopted a lot of policies which have convinced much of the Russian elite they have nowhere to go, that they must support Putin. That's all the possibility they have. What we need to do is be sending very clear messages that if there are people in the Russian elite who are prepared to make sure that policy changes, and that will, of course, require personnel changes at the very top, and that those people will be welcomed back into the international community. That will make such a choice easier for key members of the Russian elite. I don't think that most of the Russian elite is terribly thrilled with Vladimir Putin. They liked being able to go to France and Italy and Greece, and they can't do that now. They liked it when they were making lots more money than they're making now. They liked it when the ability to travel the world was something they could do. The idea that they're going to be thrilled with deciding that their next year's vacation is going to be in the Urals rather than the Côte d'Azur doesn't seem to me to be a very attractive option for many. We need to make it very clear that if they change the policy and the leadership, then we will respond positively and welcome what remains of Russia, because I think when this happens, Russia will partially disintegrate, not fully. We've watched it. It partially disintegrated in 1917, partially disintegrated in 1991. There was another round, and it will lose more of the periphery and part closer to Moscow as well this time around. But if you are a Russian patriot, you should recognize that you will lose even more if you continue to be on the policy, to support this policy and this leader. And your best option is to get rid of him and change the policy.
We have long studied ethnic conflicts and geopolitical tensions in the former Soviet Union. In your opinion, how was the war in Ukraine altered the geopolitical situation in the Caucasus region? How might the republics there respond to the future developments?
Well, we've watched. I mean, most people, of course, when we talk about ethnic conflict in the Russian Federation, focused in the first instance on the North Caucasus. It's been the most restive. We had Chechnya declare its independence. It took Russia 2 wars to install its agent in place, Mr. Kadyrov, and therefore the assumption is that this whole region will explode if Russia loses in Ukraine. My guess is there are 3 areas that I would expect to see go for independence and probably achieve it in that term. I would argue, just as a parenthesis, I would argue that Russia is far more likely to lose areas east of the Urals sooner, that it simply will not be able to control large parts of what we call Siberia and the Russian Far East. I think that goes first. But in the Caucasus, I see 3 clusters, if you will. The first is going to be Dagestan, where Moscow is already not really in control. What's been happening there shows that Moscow keeps sending in new Russian rulers who simply are not able to control the situation. The protests at the airport, the protests in Derbent and Makhachkala are all evidence of that. Second, I've been very impressed in the last 6 months to a year, the way in which the Circassian movement has coalesced. I think that the West doesn't talk about Circassia very much because Circassia is not a place on contemporary maps, on maps today. But if you consider the Circassians, the Adig people, as including Kabardinia, Karachay-Cherkessia, and the Adige Republic, and also Sochi. This whole area. I think the Circassians will probably move second. They will be the second of this trinity. The third, of course, are the Chechens. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and it should tell people a lot, is the closing down of more and more of the local madrasas in Chechnya, the increasing number of people who are being disappeared as Kadyrov tries desperately to hold on. I think that, I think Kadyrov is in greater control of the territory of the Chechen Republic today than Makhachkala is over Dagestan. I think he's losing control rapidly as well. And so my belief is that a Russian defeat in Ukraine, even another Ukrainian thrust into Russia beyond Kursk, and I expect that to happen, and the increasing use of drones across the Russian Federation. I mean, if you look at the way in which drones now aren't going just over the border, they're going 2,000 kilometers. They're in Murmansk. They're in Moscow. Yeah. This is changing the way people think, and I'm convinced that as the Putin regime is weakened by this, there will be more and more efforts in the North Caucasus as well as elsewhere to move out. And as I say, those are the three I've mentioned are what I would expect to see first. That's not the end of it. I think that it's slightly slower, but also important in this part is the Kalmyks. I think Kalmykia is going to try to get out this time around, and I would expect that the Kuban and Stavropol area will also exit. Exactly what form the regimes will take in those two places is very difficult to say because the number of players is so large. But I fully expect within weeks of when Russia loses in Ukraine, and a loss will be solidified by, quote, a peace agreement, or Russia will have to pull back, including out of Crimea. That will lead finally to the independence of those three places that has been so long denied. Let me just say one reason why you should have some confidence in this, in what I'm telling you. I was in the U.S. government at the State Department before 1991. I was an advisor. I was very, very certain that the Soviet Union was coming apart. That was not a widespread opinion because people were looking at the world through a Moscow optic. Most of what people see in this part of the world goes through Moscow. We don't have journalists, we don't have diplomats elsewhere, so we don't have reporting. But if you follow what's going on in the population, what you see is, once again, as just like 35 years ago, an emerging radicalization. And what I think is especially important and neglected, and it was neglected in 90 and 91 too. Never forget that Dzhokhar Dudayev got his ideas about how Chechnya should be an independent state because he had served as a Soviet commander in Estonia. And he had become convinced of the fact that there was no reason that Estonia should be able to be independent and Chechnya not. What I am seeing once again are more and more people who are aware of what's happening elsewhere. They're seeing that when Ukrainian troops went into Kursk, there wasn't a rising against them. They were, in fact, more or less welcomed. They weren't opposed. that changes how people will make calculations. Again, I think this is going to come more rapidly, more unexpectedly, and more radically than almost anyone expects. We're not ready for it. We won't be. I've said sometimes that the West will oppose the disintegration of Russia until it happens, and then it will take credit for it. That, unfortunately, is what happened in 91, 92, and I think it'll happen again. But the important thing is that the world's last remaining empire is closer to death today than it has ever been. And that death is going to come sooner than almost anyone imagines.
I hope we will be still alive and we'll see that moment. That's
I'm older, a lot older than you are, but I fully expect to be around to see that happen. And as I have been telling people whom I know in this country, don't buy any maps. Buy stock in companies that print maps because the maps are going to change.
They're going to change a lot, yes. The relations between Russia and Western countries have deteriorated over the years. And do you believe that Russia-Ukrainian war marks a point of no return for Russia and the West, or do you see potential for a diplomatic resolution?
I think the Russia is going, as I said, I think Russia is going to lose this war, and the West is going to support Ukraine to get a Ukrainian victory. I don't. There are very few things in history that are irreversible. I believe that if Russia changes course, you will find the West changing course too. That the sanctions regime was put in place because Russia invaded Ukraine. If Russia is out of Ukraine, if Russia is wants to open up to reestablish trade with the West, I think you will see a warming of relations that has to be managed because we've seen what Russia will do if it can exploit the situation. But having said that, I don't think that the sanctions regime will survive once Russia loses. And I think that it's important for people in Russia to understand that because a lot of people in Russia will benefit if the sanctions regime goes away. And so they will be more prepared to accept, not oppose, or even actively seek to achieve Russia's defeat precisely because of the benefits they will receive. If the West said, we're going to hate you and try to destroy you no matter what you do, very few people in Moscow would think they had anywhere to go, any reason to resist. So it's very important to understand that, of course, the West will respond differently to a Russian government that admits that the invasion of Ukraine was a crime, a violation of international law. Of course, it's important for the West to make that clear, because this is how we're going to see change happen. It would be a horrific mistake to say that Russia is always going to be the West's enemy, no matter what it does. We didn't say that about Germany when we were fighting World War II. Once Hitler was gone, the West, over the course of the next 3 decades, took in all of Germany, became part of NATO. It became part of the European community and the European Union. It's now a key element. Something probably not that dramatic, but something similar will happen once Russia changes course. So the message has got to be change course and you will benefit, not it'll always be this way no matter what you do.
When you bring the example with Germany, we had there the people who were responsible for this war staying in front of the judges, being judged, and completely changing all the government, and new people, new democratically speaking people going to the government. Is it the way you see that in Russia?
I believe there will have to be some kind of international criminal court for the current leaders of the Russian Federation. It probably will not involve hundreds of people. It will probably involve 10 or 15, but it is critically important as a way of Russia coming back into the international system, for Russians to see that the international community is a real thing, that it really cares about keeping the peace and blocking the use of armed force across international recognized borders. I think I very much hope that Mr. Putin will find the noose around him tightening. Mongolia, I understand, was unwilling to arrest him, but Mr. Putin won't be traveling very many places, because most places would arrest him now. And I think that is something we need to be clear about, that the International Criminal Court needs to be supported, and the authors of this vicious, illegal act of aggression need to be brought to justice and to face the world in The Hague.
So to just request this question from before, just by stopping the war and bringing the army out of the Ukraine, they won't be accepted.
That's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. The entire policy that Mr. Putin has articulated since 2008, first using it internationally, first using it against Georgia, then the Anschluss of Crimea, then in 22, the armed attack of Ukraine more generally, that has to be recognized by the Russians themselves as something that is impermissible, and that if they want to be part of the international community, they have to reject those policies, and they have to reject the people who authored them, Mr. Putin in the first instance. And would I be delighted if the Russian army and the Russian forces were out of the Donbass, out of Crimea, and they moved back to yes, I think I would be thrilled that happened. But that's only step one. Step two is transforming Russia so that it is no longer an empire, but a place where we can talk about the emergence of genuine nation states that can be part of the international community. I don't think it will have borders anything like the current borders of the Russian Federation. I think that you are going to see most of the republics and a large number of the regions go their own way. It's going to be complicated. It's going to be difficult. It's probably going to involve a certain amount of violence, but it's going to be part of the process of the end of the last remaining empire. And I believe the international community, as much as it wishes it didn't have to get involved with this kind of thing, will be, because if we don't, we will have people in Moscow who will be far more prepared to engage in aggression abroad and repression at home. And those two things will feed on each other, something the international community, I think, certainly doesn't want to see, and is increasingly recognizing is a continuing threat to the values of the international community.
As you started to count the international rules that was broke by Putin regime, you started by 2008 with the Georgian war. but we have huge two wars, occupation of independent country, Ichkeria by Russians, and war with 300,000 people.
I purposely started in 2008, not only because that was the year of Putin's move into Georgia, but also that was the year of his speech to the Munich Security Council. What Mr. Putin and Mr. Yeltsin, let's be clear, this was a Yeltsin policy too. What the leaders of the Russian Federation did against Chechnya and Ichkeria was a crime. It was a crime against humanity, and it was a crime of war. The problem was that Ichkeria did not have the degree of international recognition that it should have gotten. It should have been recognized. It wasn't by a large number of states. And so we're talking about from the point of view of the international community, a different situation. Many people, many governments, including the American government, were horrified by what Yeltsin and Putin did in Chechnya. They wanted that to stop. But it's from the point of view of the international system, it's different when a country does something to it had Chechnya, Ichkeria, been able to secure recognition from a sizable number of countries. And it should have, okay? The fact that it didn't means that from the point of view of many other countries, that's in a different situation. I hope that we will see recognition come very quickly this time around. Even the three Baltic countries, when they regained their independence in 1991, even they took a relatively long time to pick up 40 or 50 countries as recognizing them. I think that there is almost universal recognition that the fact that the recognition of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania came in August and September of 1991 and didn't wait until December when the entire edifice of the USSR collapsed, gave those three countries a leg up, a jump start to succeed into integrating into the West. I think because of that experience, because of the Baltic experience, there will be more interest in and more willingness to get involved and extend recognition. But the difference between a territory that has declared its independence on its own, but has not been recognized, and a territory that is seeking independence and has been recognized is fundamentally different under international law. We can agree that what was done between at the end of 91 and then from 94 until the Kadyrovs were installed as rulers was horrific. It was a crime against humanity. It was something that the international community should not have allowed to happen. And there was enough leverage to do something about that. I'm only trying to suggest that it is very important for Chechnya and for the other countries to secure international recognition. That brings me to a point which allow me to compliment what the Ichkeria movement has done, and that is, I think you're very close to getting recognition from Ukraine. The fact that you've been recognized as occupied is de facto recognition of statehood. Yes. I believe that the day will come very soon when Ukraine will go further than that. And I believe that Chechens working to achieve that, just like Dagestanis, Ingush, and Circassians, who are all working in that direction. That would put what Russia has done to Chechnya in the same category in terms of international law as what Russia did to Georgia and is doing to Ukraine. In that event, then you can count on much greater support from the international community. I'm not telling you my personal feelings. I was speaking out for Chechen independence in 91. Okay, I believed that then. I supported the Chechnya. I had the great honor of speaking several times with President Dudayev on the telephone. I'm not suggesting that somehow Russia was in the right. I'm only trying to explain why it is the international community behaved one way in that circumstance and a different way in the other. And I'm thrilled to see the convergence, the way in which Chechens today with Ukraine are moving in the right direction to narrow the difference and make it more likely that ultimately Kiev, but other countries as well, will recognize the independence of Ichkeria.
Paul, I know absolutely that you support us, and that's why I also wanted to speak with you today. And I know everything you have done for us, you are doing for us. And this point that you mentioned, it's very important for us, and we have some different views on it, because I know that for West, it was the reason to say, okay, it's not a independent country because of this international law where they recognize it as a part of Russia in 70s and as a part of Soviet Union, and they say, okay, they are already inside, and these borders we will respect them. But it was already there, a wrong decision. But anyway, we're going to the later to the 90s where Soviet Union falls, and Chechnya is going away from Soviet Union as a absolute autonomous republic and declares on the rights like that did on also other republics, countries on the right, that was written down in Soviet Union before the fall. They declared the independent country. They declared we write our democratic secular constitution, and we are independent country for 3 years when the Russian invade us. So
well, they wanted to invade you even before that, and yes, I'm very much aware that Ichkeria declared its independence from the Soviet Union, not from the Russian Federation. It declared that happened well before the Soviet Union ceased to exist. I completely agree that Chechnya had the right to do, Chechens had the right to do that. I completely agree that they had formed a de facto independent state. What I'm trying to explain is that from the point of view of the international community, there was such hope in 91 and 92 that Russia was going to turn into a beautiful Russia of the future, to use our current term.
Yeah.
It was going to be a liberal, democratic, free market ally of the West, that people were very reluctant to take the steps they should have taken. They should have recognized that the interrelationship between repression inside Russia and Moscow's aggression abroad is very close. Russia is repressive at home so that it can be aggressive abroad, and it is aggressive abroad in order to be repressive at home. That needs to be broken. That link needs to be broken, and that's what I meant about a fundamental change in what Russia is. That was not understood, or at least it was not accepted by most Western leaders in the 1990s, or even until very recently. Putin has done more to bring about the end of the Russian state than any other ruler in history.
Very
He has done it by demonstrating that this link of repression at home and aggression abroad is very tight, and that both have to be broken. Each has to be broken so that the other doesn't happen. That is something that you couldn't get much of an audience for saying even 5 years ago. Now, I think it's become common ground in most Western countries. The question is now a much more tactical one. How do you go about breaking that relationship? And there are widespread, many people would like to see a non-recognition policy with respect to Chechnya, much as we had with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania from 1940 until 1991. Many people would like to see a much more forward policy. Others are afraid of that for all kinds of reasons. And what I'm saying is Chechens today are doing exactly the right thing by being most active in Kiev, because the Ukrainian actions in international affairs, being first is always the hardest. Once somebody has done it, others will follow. And I believe that what Chechens have achieved from the Ukrainian parliament goes a long way to opening the door for a much better future.
Paul, what do you think? What role do the US and Europe play in supporting ethnic and regional movements in Russia, such as Chechnya? Could the war in Ukraine increase Western interest in such movements?
Well, I've spoken to that really. I believe that Putin's war in Ukraine has forced people to pay more attention to the fact that the Russian Federation, quote unquote, is in fact a repressive empire, that more attention has been focused on the ethnic minorities and the regional movements than was thinkable before 2014. And so, yes, would some of us like to see a more forward policy than we have, that is expanded broadcasting, receiving leaders and activists from those places at a more official level? Absolutely. Is that going to happen overnight? No, because that's not the way things are. But it will. But as we watch, I mean, if someone had said in 2021, Ukraine is going to recognize Chechnya as an occupied country, people would have laughed. They've said that'd be unthinkable. Well, it's happened. If you talk about what Ukraine has done, I think that Ukraine has behaved magnificently, and I think that what needs to be done is build on what Ukraine has done, and from this it also follows that the non-Russians and the Russian regions need to work together because they have common interests. For the Chechen diaspora, the Chechen independence movement, to be talking to the Dagestanis, to be talking to the Circassians, to be talking to the Kalmyks, it's very important that they pursue things together. The greatest fear Moscow has is not Western intervention, which won't happen in the way that people might like, but rather that suddenly Moscow will face a united front so that it can't play divide and rule politics. And that's to the extent that I see that happening. And the Circassians have been the leaders in this, but the Chechens have done more than many people know. The Chechen movement has not done as much as it should, and it has not advertised what it has done. I think it's important to overcome both of those things.
Paul, I have to thank you for your time,
My pleasure.
for your analysis, for being with us, and I hope we will have time and we will repeat such conversations again. And very soon we will repeat it because of your prognosis coming true about.
I think it's great. I'm very optimistic. I don't think we're going to be, the future is going to be without problems, without difficulties.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think there is more reason for optimism about Chechnya's future than at any point in my lifetime. And that's something.
Yes.
So I congratulate you and thank you for talking. I hope we can talk again.